The wind howled through the gaps in the rotting wooden walls, carrying with it the bitter promise of death. Inside the abandoned hunting shack on the outskirts of Millbrook, Montana, 20-3-year-old Rebecca Martinez clutched her 3 newborn babies closer to her chest, feeling their tiny bodies shivering against the threadbare blanket that was all she had left in the world. The temperature had dropped to 15 below zero, and she knew that by morning they might all be gone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She had been walking for 3 days through the snow-covered wilderness, her feet numb in shoes that had given up protecting her miles ago. The babies, 2 girls and a boy, had been born just a week earlier in a gas station bathroom in the middle of nowhere, delivered by a kind stranger who disappeared before Rebecca could even thank her properly. Now as she sat in this forgotten place with no food, no heat, and no hope, she whispered the same prayer she had been updating for hours. Please, just let them live. Take me if you have to, but let them live. What Rebecca didn't know was that less than a mile away, a man was making a decision that would change all their lives forever. The morning that would reshape everything began 3 weeks earlier in the bustling emergency room of Denver General Hospital. Dr. Marcus Sullivan had just finished a grueling 18-hour shift when he received the call that shattered his world into a million irreparable pieces. Marcus, you need to sit down. The voice of his brother David carried a weight that immediately made Marcus's stomach drop. Sarah and Emma. There was an accident on Highway 25. A drunk driver ran a red light. The phone slipped from Marcus's hand as the words hit him. His wife Sarah, his 5-year-old daughter Emma, they had been driving to Emma's dance recital. The one Marcus had missed because of an emergency surgery. The one he had promised to attend but couldn't because someone else's life had hung in the balance. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and hollow condolences. Marcus stood at the Faya graveside, watching as they lowered the 2 most important people in his life into the cold Colorado earth. His colleagues spoke of his dedication, his skill as a surgeon, his ability to save lives. But what good were healing hands when they couldn't protect the people who mattered most? After the service, Marcus's mother, Eleanor, approached him with tears streaming down her weathered face. Marcus, honey, you can't stay in that house. You can't keep torturing yourself. She was right. Every room held memories that felt like knives. Emma's art projects still hung on the refrigerator. Sarah's coffee cup still sat by the kitchen sink, a ring of lipstick on the rim that Marcus couldn't bring himself to wash away. The silence was deafening, broken only by the phantom sounds of laughter that would never echo through those halls. Again, 2 weeks later, Marcus loaded his truck with whatever belongings he could bear to take and drove north toward Montana, where his grandfather had left him a cabin in the wilderness outside Millbrook. He had visited the place only once as a child, but he remembered the peace of the mountains, the way the world seemed to slow down among the towering pines and endless sky. The cabin sat on 47 acres of pristine wilderness, accessed by a winding dirt road that became impassable during heavy snow. It was perfect, isolated enough that Marcus could disappear from the world that had taken everything from him, yet close enough to civilization that he could still practice medicine if he chose to. The nearest town, Millbrook, had a small clinic that had been operating without a full-time doctor for over a year. Marcus spent his first week in Montana chopping wood and repairing the cabin's aging infrastructure. The physical labor felt good, different from the precise movements required in surgery. His hands, which had grown soft from years of wearing surgical gloves, quickly developed calluses. His body, which had been sustained on hospital cafeteria food and too much coffee, began to crave the simple meals he prepared over the wood-burning stove. But the grief followed him like a shadow. In the quiet moments between tasks, when the mountain air carried no sound but the whisper of wind through pine needles, the loss would crash over him again. He would find himself reaching for his phone to call Sarah, or listening for Emma's voice calling for him to push her on the tire swing that hung from the old oak tree beside the cabin. On his 8th day in Montana, Marcus drove into Millbrook to buy supplies. The town was smaller than he had expected, a single main street lined with weathered storefronts, a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s, and a general store that seemed to carry everything from fishing lures to prescription medications. At Henderson's general store, Marcus met Walt Henderson, a barrel-chested man in his 60s, with hands like tree roots and eyes that seemed to see everything. Walt had heard about the new resident on the old Sullivan property news. Traveled fast in a town of 800 people. "You're Robert Sullivan's grandson," Walt said, more a statement than a question, as he rang up Marcus's groceries. "Good man, your grandfather. Helped a lot of folks around here over the years." Marcus nodded, unsure how to respond. He hadn't known his grandfather well. The old man had died when Marcus was in medical school, too busy with studies and rotations to make the trip to Montana for the funeral. "Heard you're a doctor," Walt continued, his weathered hands moving efficiently over the register keys. "Doc Peterson retired last spring. Folks around here have been driving 2 hours to Billings for anything more serious than a scraped knee." "I'm not practicing right now," Marcus replied, the words feeling strange in his mouth. For 15 years, being a doctor had been the core of his identity. Now it felt like a coat that no longer fit. Walt studied him with those penetrating eyes. "Sometimes a man needs to step away from his calling for a while. Doesn't mean the calling goes away." That evening, Marcus sat on his cabin's front porch, watching the sun set behind the snow-capped peaks in the distance. The conversation with Walt replayed in his mind. He thought about the Hippocratic oath he had taken so many years ago, about the responsibility to heal, to help, to do no harm. Had he been doing harm by walking away from medicine? Or was he simply too broken to be trusted with other people's lives? The answer came 3 days later. Marcus was splitting wood behind the cabin when he heard the sound, a distant rumbling that grew steadily louder. He looked up to see a battered pickup truck careening down his dirt road, moving far too fast for the icy conditions. The truck hit a patch of black ice about 50 yards from the cabin and went into a spin, sliding sideways before slamming into a massive pine tree with a sickening crunch of metal and glass. Without thinking, Marcus dropped his axe and ran toward the wreckage. The truck's horn was blaring continuously, suggesting the driver had been thrown forward into the steering wheel. Steam rose from the crumpled hood, and Marcus could smell the acrid scent of leaking radiator fluid, mixed with something that made his stomach turn blood. The driver's side door was jammed shut, but Marcus managed to wrench open the passenger door and crawl across the bench seat to reach the injured man. He was young, maybe 25, with shaggy brown hair and work clothes that suggested he made his living with his hands. Blood streamed from a gash on his forehead, and his left arm hung at an unnatural angle. "Hey, can you hear me?" Marcus pressed his fingers to the man's neck, checking for a pulse. It was there, steady but weak. "What's your name?" The young man's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Jake," he mumbled. "Jake Morrison. My arm. Something's wrong with my arm." Marcus could see that the arm was broken, probably in multiple places, but his training told him to check for more serious injuries first. Head trauma, internal bleeding, spinal damage, any of these could be life-threatening. He ran his hands along Jake's torso, checking for signs of internal injury, while simultaneously assessing his pupil response and cognitive function. "Jake, I need you to stay with me, okay? I'm a doctor. You've been in an accident, but you're going to be fine. Can you wiggle your toes for me?" Jake's boots moved slightly, which was a good sign, no obvious spinal damage. But his responses were sluggish, and Marcus could see that the head wound was deeper than it had initially appeared. This man needed immediate medical attention, and The nearest hospital was over an hour away on good roads. In these conditions, with an injured man who might have a concussion, it could take twice that long. Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible just minutes earlier. "Jake, I'm going to move you to my cabin. I have medical supplies there, and I can treat your injuries." What he didn't tell Jake was that he had been carrying a fully stocked medical kit in his truck since leaving Denver, force of habit from years of being on call. He had enough supplies to stabilize most injuries, and his cabin had been equipped with a generator and proper lighting. Getting Jake out of the truck and into Marcus's vehicle required careful maneuvering to avoid aggravating his injuries. Marcus fashioned a makeshift cervical collar from a towel and duct tape, then slowly extracted Jake from the wreckage. Every movement was deliberate, calculated to minimize further damage. Inside the cabin, Marcus transformed his dining table into an operating surface. He started an IV line to combat shock, cleaned and sutured the head wound, and set Jake's broken arm using techniques he had learned during his emergency medicine rotation years earlier. Throughout the process, he found himself falling back into the familiar rhythm of medical practice: assess, stabilize, treat. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness, but his vital signs remained stable. By the time Marcus finished treating his injuries, 3 hours had passed. The young man would need X-rays to confirm that the arm was properly set, and he would require monitoring for signs of concussion, but he was going to survive. As Jake slept off the pain medication, Marcus sat in his kitchen, staring at his hands. They were stained with blood, not the sterile environment of an operating room, but the raw, immediate need of someone whose life hung in the balance. For the first time in weeks, the constant ache in his chest had receded slightly. He had saved a life today, and that had to mean something. When Jake woke up the next morning, his first words were, "You saved my life, Doc." Marcus helped him sit up, checking his pupils and reflexes. "How do you feel? Any nausea? Dizziness?" "Like I got hit by a freight train, but better than yesterday." Jake looked around the cabin, taking in his surroundings for the first time. "This place is incredible. You live here all alone?" The question hit Marcus harder than he expected. "Yes," he said simply. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jake seemed to sense there was more to the story, but he didn't push. Instead, he looked down at his expertly bandaged arm, then back at Marcus. "Walt Henderson was right. Said we had a real doctor living up here now. Sighed maybe our luck was changing." Over the next 2 days, while Jake recovered enough to be safely transported to town, Marcus learned about life in Millbrook. Jake worked for the county road department, maintaining the mountain highways that connected the small communities scattered throughout the region. He had been rushing to repair a washout on Highway 47. When he lost control of his truck on Marcus's road, he had been taking a shortcut he had used dozens of times before. "People around here don't have much," Jake explained, "but they look out for each other." When old Doc Peterson retired, it hit everyone hard. Folks started putting off medical care, driving to Billings only when they absolutely had to. Mrs. Chun at the diner has been rationing her diabetes medication. Tom Bradley's been working with a hernia for 6 months because he can't afford to take time off for surgery in the city. Marcus found himself thinking about these people, strangers who had become real through Jake's stories. Mrs. Chun, who made the best apple pie in 3 counties. Tom Bradley, who ran the only auto repair shop and never charged full price for work on vehicles belonging to families who were struggling financially. These were people who needed medical care, people who were suffering because they didn't have access to a doctor. In the morning, Marcus drove Jake back to town. Walt Henderson was waiting at the general store with a pot of coffee and a proposition. "Jake told me what you did," Walt said, pouring coffee into 3 mismatched mugs. "Proper medical care," he said. professional as any big city hospital. Marcus accepted the coffee but remained silent. The clinic building is still there, Walt continued. County owns it now, but they'd lease it to the right person for practically nothing. Equipment mostly still good. Doc Peterson took care of his tools. What it needs is someone who remembers why he became a doctor in the first place. I'm not sure I'm ready, Marcus said, the words coming out quieter than he intended. Walt studied him over his coffee mug. Son, I've lived in this town for 63 years. I've seen people at their best and their worst, and I've learned that sometimes the folks who've been broken are the ones who know best how to help others heal. That afternoon, Marcus drove to the abandoned clinic. It sat on Main Street between the hardware store and the post office, a modest building with large windows that would let in plenty of natural light. The sign above the door read Millbrook Medical Clinic in faded blue letters. Walt had given him the key, and Marcus stepped inside to find a fully equipped medical facility frozen in time. Examination rooms with stirrups and blood pressure cuffs. A small laboratory area, even a minor surgery suite that, while dated, was perfectly functional. Doc Peterson had left everything behind when he retired to Arizona, apparently hoping that another physician would eventually take over his practice. Marcus ran his hand along the examination table in the main room, imagining the patients who had been treated here over the years. Children with scraped knees and broken arms, mothers giving birth, elderly residents managing chronic conditions, workers injured in the mills and mines that dotted the region. This place had been a lifeline for the community, and its absence was felt every day. Standing in that empty clinic, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The grief was still there, it would always be there, but alongside it was something else. But maybe, or simply the recognition that his skills could make a difference in this place, for these people who had no other options. That evening, he called the county offices in Billings and began the process of reactivating his Montana medical license. 3 months after Marcus reopened the Millbrook Medical Clinic, life had settled into a rhythm he hadn't expected to find again. The people of the town had embraced him with a warmth that both surprised and humbled him. Every morning, he would arrive at the clinic to find Walt Henderson sweeping the front steps, claiming it was just part of his routine walk. Though Marcus suspected the older man was simply making sure the doctor showed up, the patient roster had grown steadily. Mrs. Chun's diabetes was now properly managed, and her grateful family had taken to leaving containers of homemade soup on the clinic's doorstep. Tom Bradley had finally gotten his hernia repaired in a day surgery Marcus performed at the small hospital in Bozeman, returning to work pain-free for the first time in months. Word had spread throughout the mountain communities, and people drove from as far as 50 miles away to see the doctor who charged what they could afford and never turned anyone away. But it was the unexpected cases that reminded Marcus why he had become a physician in the first place. Like the morning when rancher Bill Kowalski stumbled through the clinic door, his face gray with pain, clutching his chest. Marcus had recognized the signs immediately: massive heart attack, the kind that killed men in their prime. Within minutes, he had Bill stabilized and was coordinating with the helicopter medical team from Billings. Bill survived, returned to his ranch, and named his new foal Marcus in honor of the doctor who had saved his life. The work was different from his days in Denver's trauma center. Here, he was more than just a surgeon, he was a family doctor, a psychiatrist, sometimes even a veterinarian when the local animals needed care and their owners couldn't afford the drive to the nearest animal hospital. He delivered babies, treated broken bones, managed chronic illnesses, and provided comfort to the dying. It was exactly the kind of comprehensive practice that had drawn him to medicine in the first place. Before specialization in hospital politics had narrowed his focus, on a particularly cold Tuesday in late November, Marcus was reviewing patient files when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Sheriff Patricia Dawson, a tough-as-nails woman in her 50s who had been keeping the peace in these mountains for over 2 decades. "Doc, I need you to meet me at the old Riverside campground. We've got a situation." Marcus grabbed his medical bag and emergency kit. "What kind of situation?" "Body in the river. Young woman looks like she's been there a while. Coroner's tied up in Billings with that multi-car accident. Won't be here until tomorrow. Need you take a look. Give me your professional opinion on what we're dealing with." The drive to Riverside Campground took Marcus through some of the most beautiful country in Montana, rolling hills covered in golden grass, stands of aspen trees that had turned brilliant yellow in the autumn cold, and the ever-present backdrop of snow-capped mountains. But the beauty was lost on him as he considered what he might find at the river. Sheriff Dawson was waiting beside her patrol car when Marcus arrived. 2 deputies were setting up a perimeter, and the county photographer was already documenting the scene. The body had been found by a group of hunters who had stopped to water their horses. "Fair warning, Doc," Patricia said as they walked toward the riverbank. "This one's rough, young, maybe early 20s. Been in the water at least a week, maybe more." The body lay caught against a fallen tree at the river's edge, partially submerged in the icy water. Marcus could see immediately that this was no accidental drowning. The woman's clothes were torn, and there were obvious signs of trauma. He pulled on latex gloves and began his preliminary examination, his clinical training taking over as he documented what he observed. "She was beaten before. She went in the water," Marcus told Patricia after his examination. "Multiple contusions, possible sexual assault. This is a homicide, no question." Patricia nodded grimly. "That's what I figured. Question is, who is she? No identification, and she doesn't match any missing person reports we've received." Marcus studied the young woman's face, trying to see past the damage the river had done. She had been pretty once, with delicate features and long brown hair. Her clothes suggested she hadn't been wealthy discount store jeans, a worn sweater, shoes that had seen better days. But there was something about her that spoke of strength, of someone who had been fighting long before she ended up in this river. "She was pregnant," Marcus said quietly, his examination revealing the telltale signs, recently, within the last few weeks. Patricia's expression darkened. "So we've got a pregnant woman who was beaten and murdered, then dumped in the river. This just keeps getting worse." As they waited for the body to be transported to the morgue in Billings, Marcus found himself thinking about the unknown woman. Who had she been? Where had she come from? And most importantly, what had happened to her baby? The answer to that last question came 3 days later, when Patricia called Marcus at the clinic with news that would change everything. "Doc, remember that woman we found in the river? Well, we just got a call from a truck stop about 60 miles south of here. Manager found a newborn baby abandoned in their restroom. Still alive, but barely. EMTs are bringing the baby to your clinic now. It's the closest medical facility." Marcus hung up the phone and began preparing the clinic's small emergency room. A newborn abandoned at a truck stop would likely be hypothermic, dehydrated, and possibly suffering from exposure. He set up warming blankets, prepared 4 fluids, and called the neonatal unit at Billings General to alert them that he might need to transport a critical infant. When the ambulance arrived, Marcus was shocked by what he saw. The EMTA, a seasoned professional named Rick Conway, was carrying not 1 baby, but 3. "Found them all together in a cardboard box," Rick explained as he transferred the infants to Marcus's examination table. 2 girls and a boy, look like they're maybe a week old. Whoever left them there wrapped them in towels and left a note. Marcus began his assessment of the 3 babies, while Rick read from a crumpled piece of paper. "Please take care of my babies. Their names are Hope, Faith, and Gabriel. I can't give them what they need, but maybe someone else can. Tell them their mama loved them." The babies were in surprisingly good condition, considering their circumstances. They were underweight and showing signs of mild dehydration, but their Vital signs were stable. Marcus started 4 lines on all 3 infants, began rehydration therapy, and called for a medical helicopter to transport them to the neonatal intensive care unit in Billings. While they waited for the helicopter, Marcus found himself studying the 3 tiny faces. The family resemblance was unmistakable, the same delicate features, the same wisp of dark hair. And suddenly, he knew with absolute certainty that these were the children of the woman they had found in the river. "Patricia," Marcus said when the sheriff arrived at the clinic. "These babies belong to our Jane Doe, I'm sure of it." Patricia looked at the sleeping infants, her expression softening despite the grim circumstances. "So the mother's dead, and someone else has been caring for the babies. Question is who, and why abandon them now?" The investigation took on new urgency. Patricia and her team canvassed truck stops, gas stations, and small towns throughout the region, looking for anyone who might have information about a young woman with triplets. Meanwhile, the babies were thriving in the NICU, their condition improving daily under the care of Billings General's pediatric team. It was during one of Marcus's visits to check on the infants that he met Nancy Rodriguez, the head nurse in the neonatal unit. Nancy was a small woman with graying hair and kind eyes who had been caring for premature and sick babies for over 20 years. "These 3 are fighters," Nancy told Marcus as they stood beside the isolettes where Hope, Faith, and Gabriel slept peacefully. Whoever was caring for them before they were abandoned did a good job. They're well nourished, with no signs of neglect or abuse. Someone loved these babies. Marcus nodded, but his mind was already working on the problem that would soon arise. The babies were healthy enough to be discharged from the hospital, but where would they go? The state's child protective services were overwhelmed, and finding a single family willing and able to adopt triplets would be nearly impossible. More likely, the children would be separated and placed in different foster homes, scattered across the state system. That the thought of these 3 siblings being separated bothered Marcus more than he cared to admit. He had been an only child, and while his parents had been loving, he had always wondered what it would have been like to have brothers or sisters. Sarah had been the same, an only child who had dreamed of having a large family. They had been trying for their second child when the accident happened. Over the next week, Marcus found himself making daily trips to Billings to check on the babies, even though they no longer needed his medical care. He would stand beside their isolettes, watching them sleep, marveling at how 3 such tiny beings could have survived everything they had been through. The nurses began to joke that he was becoming a 4th parent to the triplets. It was Nancy who finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air. "Dr. Sullivan, have you ever considered adoption?" The question caught Marcus off guard. No, I haven't really thought about it." "These babies are going to need someone special," Nancy continued gently. "Someone who understands that they've already been through trauma, even if they're too young to remember it. Someone who can give them stability and love." That night, Marcus sat in his cabin, staring into the fireplace and thinking about Nancy's words. The idea of adoption had never occurred to him, but now that it had been planted, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He thought about Sarah and how much she had wanted more children. He thought about Emma and how excited she had been at the prospect of becoming a big sister. He thought about the empty bedrooms in his cabin and the silence that filled every corner of his life. But could he really take on the responsibility of raising 3 children? He was 42 years old, single, still grieving the loss of his own family. What did he know about caring for infants? And what would it mean for his medical practice, his life in Millbrook? The answer came to him gradually over the following days. During his morning rounds at the clinic, he found himself noticing the families who came in for treatment. The Hendersons with their 4 children, all of whom adored their grandfather. Walt. The Bradleys with their twin boys who were constantly getting into mischief. The Kowalskis with their teenage daughter who helped her father on the ranch and was applying to veterinary school. These were families that had been built on love and commitment, not just biology. They had faced challenges and overcome them together. They had created homes where children could grow up safe and secure, surrounded by people who cared about them. Marcus realized that he had been thinking about this all wrong. It wasn't about whether he was ready to be a father. It was about whether these 3 children deserved a chance at a real family. And if he could provide that, if he could give them the stability and love they needed, then maybe this was exactly what he was supposed to do. The decision crystallized one afternoon when he was visiting the babies in the NICU. Hope, the smallest of the 3, had been fussy all day, crying inconsolably despite the nurse's best efforts. When Marcus picked her up, she immediately settled, her tiny fist wrapping around his finger as she gazed up at him with dark eyes that seemed far too wise for someone so young. "She knows you," Nancy said softly. "Babies have a way of recognizing the people who are meant to be in their lives." That evening, Marcus called his lawyer in Denver and began the process of filing adoption papers. It would be complicated. Single fathers were less common adoptive parents, and the fact that he was adopting 3 children at once would require additional scrutiny. But his medical credentials, his stable income, and his reputation in the community would work in his favor. The social worker assigned to his case, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, was initially skeptical. During her first visit to evaluate Marcus's home, she peppered him with questions about his motivations, his support system, and his long-term plans. "Dr. Sullivan," she said as they sat in his living room, "I have to ask, why triplets? Most people looking to adopt want to start with 1 child, especially first-time parents." Marcus had been expecting this question, and he had thought carefully about his answer. "Because they're a family," he said simply. "They've been through enough trauma already. Separating them would just add to that. They belong together." Jennifer made notes on her clipboard, her expression neutral. "And you're prepared for the challenges that come with 3 infants? The sleepless nights, the financial burden, the impact on your medical practice?" "I've been thinking about that," Marcus replied. "The clinic is doing well, and I've been considering bringing in a nurse practitioner to help with the patient load. As for the rest of it, I know it won't be easy, but I also know that these children need someone who's committed to them for the long haul." The home study process took 6 weeks. Jennifer interviewed Marcus multiple times, spoke with his patients and colleagues in Millbrook, and conducted extensive background checks. She evaluated his financial situation, his medical records, and his psychological fitness to be a parent. Throughout it all, Marcus continued his daily visits to the NICU, feeding the babies, changing diapers, and learning the countless small details of infant care. Finally, on a snowy December morning, Jennifer called with the news Marcus had been hoping for. "Congratulations, Dr. Sullivan. Your adoption petition has been approved. You can bring your children home." The first few weeks of fatherhood tested every assumption Marcus had ever held about his own capabilities. Hope, faith, and Gabriel, now legally his children, had transformed his quiet cabin into a symphony of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and the kind of sleepless nights that made his old surgical residency seem like a vacation. He had converted Sarah and Emma's former bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and installing 3 cribs that Jake Morrison had built by hand. The local women of Millbrook had rallied around their new doctor's unexpected family, showing up at his door with casseroles, baby clothes, and an endless stream of advice about everything from colic remedies to sleep training. Mrs. Chun had appointed herself the baby's unofficial grandmother, arriving each morning at 7 with breakfast for Marcus and an armload of supplies. "You look terrible, doctor," she would say matter-of-factly, taking Gabriel from his arms while he struggled with a bottle. "When did you last sleep more than 2 hours?" The honest answer was that Marcus couldn't remember. The babies were on different schedules, ensuring that just as one settled down, another would wake hungry or needing a change. He had hired Jenny Patterson, a certified nurse practitioner from Bozeman, to help manage the clinic 3 days a week. But even with reduced hours, balancing his medical practice with 3 infants felt like juggling fire, yet somehow, against all logic and exhaustion, Marcus was happier than he had been since the accident. The babies had given him something he hadn't realized he needed, a reason to focus on the future instead of dwelling in the past. Each smile, each tiny hand that grasped his finger, each peaceful moment when all 3 were sleeping, felt like a small miracle. It was during one of these rare quiet evenings in late January that Marcus received the call that would append his carefully constructed new life. He was sitting in his living room, reading medical journals while the babies napped, when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Dr. Sullivan? This is Detective Ray Martinez with the Colorado State Police. I'm calling about the Jane Doe case you consulted on in Montana last fall. We may have some new information." Marcus sat up straighter, his mind immediately going to the young woman they had found in the river. The case had gone cold after weeks of investigation, with no identification, and no leads about who might have killed her. "What kind of information?" Marcus asked. "We've been working a related case down here, a young woman named Rebecca Martinez who disappeared from a domestic violence shelter in Denver about 6 months ago. She was pregnant with triplets when she vanished. The timing and circumstances suggest she might be your victim." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Martinez, is she related to you?" "My daughter," Detective Martinez said, his voice heavy with grief. "She'd been trying to escape an abusive boyfriend, got into our shelter system, but then she just disappeared one night. We've been looking for her ever since." The detective went on to explain that Rebecca had been in an on and off relationship with a man named Tyler Garrison, a small-time drug dealer with a history of violence against women. When Rebecca had discovered she was pregnant, Tyler had become increasingly controlling and abusive. She had finally found the courage to leave. When she was 7 months pregnant, taking refuge in a shelter while she planned her next steps. The night she disappeared, one of the other women at the shelter said Rebecca got a phone call. Detective Martinez continued. Someone claiming to know where Tyler was keeping some of her belongings, sentimental stuff from her childhood she thought was gone forever. The caller said Tyler was out of town and she could get her things back if she came alone. It was obviously a trap, Marcus realized. Someone had lured Rebecca away from the safety of the shelter, and she had never made it back. "Dr. Sullivan, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. The babies that were found near your town, the ones you adopted, is there any chance they could be Rebecca's children?" Marcus closed his eyes, thinking about the timeline. The woman in the river had been dead for about a week when they found her in November. The babies had been discovered shortly afterward, apparently cared for by someone else before being abandoned. If Rebecca had given birth and then been murdered, someone else had been taking care of her children. "It's possible," Marcus admitted. "The timing would work. But detective, those babies are legally my children now. The adoption was finalized months ago. I understand that, and I'm not trying to take them away from you. But I need to know if they're Rebecca's kids. I need to know what happened to my daughter's children." Marcus agreed to DNA testing, though the process would take several weeks to complete. In the meantime, Detective Martinez flew to Montana to meet with Sheriff Dawson and review the evidence from the river case. The 2 law enforcement officers worked together to piece together what had likely happened to Rebecca. The story that emerged was heartbreaking. Rebecca had apparently given birth somewhere in the wilderness, possibly in an abandoned building or campsite. Someone Detective Martinez suspected it might have been Tyler Garrison himself had been holding her and the babies, likely planning to sell the children or use them as leverage to control Rebecca. But something had gone wrong. Rebecca had been murdered and dumped in the river, but not before someone else had taken the babies to safety. The question is, who saved those children? Sheriff Dawson asked during one of their strategy sessions at the clinic. Someone risked their own life to get those babies away from whoever killed Rebecca. Someone who cared enough to keep them safe for weeks before finally leaving them where they'd be found. The answer came from an unexpected source. Tom Bradley, the mechanic who had become one of Marcus's closest friends in Millbrook, stopped by the clinic one afternoon with information that changed everything. "Doc, I've been thinking about that case Patricia mentioned. The murdered woman. And the babies. There's something I need to tell you." Tom explained that his brother Danny, who had struggled with drug addiction for years, had been living rough in the mountains during the fall. Danny had been trying to get clean, staying in abandoned cabins and hunting shacks while avoiding the people he owed money to. "Danny came to see me right around Thanksgiving," Tom said. "He was acting strange, asking for baby formula and diapers. Said he was helping someone, but he wouldn't tell me who. A few days later, he disappeared again. Haven't seen him since." "Sheriff." Dawson immediately put out a statewide alert for Danny Bradley. They found him 3 days later in a homeless camp outside of Billings, strung out on methamphetamine and barely coherent. But when he sobered up enough to understand what they were asking, his story filled in the missing pieces of Rebecca's final weeks. Danny had been squatting in an old hunting cabin about 10 miles from where Rebecca's body was found when Tyler Garrison showed up with Rebecca and the newborn babies. Tyler was high on drugs and talking about selling the children to pay off his debts. He was keeping Rebecca chained to a bed, threatening to kill her babies if she tried to escape. "I watched that cabin for 2 days, Danny told the investigators. "That girl was just a kid, and those babies were so tiny. I knew I had to do something, but Tyler had a gun, and he was crazy paranoid." Danny's opportunity came when Tyler left to meet with potential buyers for the babies. Rebecca begged Danny to take her children and run, telling him she would follow as soon as she could break free from the chains. But Tyler returned before Rebecca could escape, and in his drug-fueled rage, he beat her to death when he discovered the babies were gone. "She saved those babies' lives," Danny said, tears streaming down his face. "She knew she wasn't going to make it out of there. She made sure her kids had a chance." Danny had kept the babies for nearly 3 weeks, caring for them as best he could while avoiding Tyler and his associates. But his own drug addiction and the strain of caring for 3 infants eventually overwhelmed him. Desperate and out of options, he had left them at the truck stop, hoping someone would find them and give them the care they deserved. When the DNA results came back, they confirmed what everyone already suspected. Hope, Faith, and Gabriel were Rebecca Martinez's children. Detective Martinez flew back to Montana to meet his grandchildren for the first time, an encounter that was both joyful and heartbreaking. "They're beautiful," he said, holding Faith while she slept peacefully in his arms. "They look just like Rebecca when she was a baby." But Detective Martinez wasn't there to claim custody of the children. He was a widower in his 60s with a demanding career in law enforcement. He had been devastated by his daughter's death and knew he wasn't equipped to raise 3 infants. "Dr. Sullivan," he said, "I've been thinking about this for weeks, since I first called you. Those babies have been through more trauma than any child should experience. But you've given them stability and love. You've made them part of your family. I don't want to disrupt that." What Detective Martinez proposed was something Marcus hadn't expected: a formal agreement that would allow the detective to remain part of the children's lives as their grandfather, while Marcus continued as their adoptive father. It was an unusual arrangement, but one that would ensure the children knew their mother's story and had a connection to their biological family. The legal proceedings to formalize this arrangement took several months, during which Detective Martinez became a regular visitor to Millbrook. He helped Marcus with the babies, sharing stories about Rebecca and her childhood, ensuring that Hope, Faith, and Gabriel would grow up knowing about the mother who had sacrificed everything to save them. Tyler, Garrison was eventually arrested in Mexico and extradited to face murder charges. The trial was a media sensation, with Danny Bradley's testimony providing the key evidence that led to Tyler's conviction for first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole as spring arrived in Montana. Marcus found his life settling into a new rhythm. The babies were sleeping through the night more consistently, and he had learned to manage his medical practice around their needs. Jenny Patterson had agreed to become a full-time partner in the clinic, taking over much of the routine care while Marcus focused on emergency cases and procedures. The community of Millbrook had embraced Hope, Faith, and Gabriel as their own. Walt Henderson had taken to calling himself their honorary great-grandfather, and Mrs. Chun insisted on babysitting whenever Marcus had to travel to Bozeman for medical consultations. The babies had become the unofficial mascots of the town, bringing joy and hope to a community that had seen its share of hardship, but it was the quiet moments that meant the most to Marcus' bedtime stories when all three babies would curl up against him, listening to his voice even though they were too young to understand the words. Bath time giggles that filled the cabin with laughter. The way Faith would always reach for his hand when she was falling asleep, or how Gabriel would smile every time he heard Marcus's voice. One evening in late May, as Marcus was putting the babies to bed, he found himself thinking about Rebecca Martinez, the young woman whose sacrifice had made this family possible. He had placed a small framed photo of her in the nursery, and he made a habit of telling the children about their brave mother, who had loved them enough to save their lives. "Your mama was a hero," he whispered to them as they settled into their cribs. "She made sure you were safe, and now you're going to grow up surrounded by people who love you. You're going to have the life she wanted you to have." As he turned off the nursery light and headed to his own bedroom, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed in less than a year. He had come to Montana broken and alone, carrying grief that felt too heavy to bear. But these three small children had shown him that healing was possible, that love could grow in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the family you choose is just as strong as the one you're born into. The babies were his now, legally and emotionally. But more than that, he was their father, their protector, the person who would be there for every milestone, every scraped knee, every triumph and disappointment that lay ahead. It was a responsibility that both humbled and energized him, a second chance at fatherhood that he was determined not to waste. 2 years had passed since Marcus first brought Hope, Faith, and Gabriel home to his cabin in the Montana wilderness. The children were now walking, babbling in their own secret language, and getting into the kind of mischief that kept their father simultaneously exhausted and delighted. Faith had inherited her mother's determination, often attempting to climb furniture twice her height. Gabriel was the peacemaker, always sharing his toys with his sisters. Hope, the smallest but fiercest, had a laugh that could light up the darkest winter day. The clinic had grown beyond Marcus's wildest expectations. What had started as a small practice serving the immediate Millbrook community now drew patients from a 100-mile radius. Marcus had hired 2 additional nurse practitioners and a physician assistant, transforming the single-room clinic into a comprehensive medical center with satellite offices in 3 neighboring towns. But it was the unexpected arrival on a bitter February morning that would test everything Marcus thought he knew about his carefully ordered life. Marcus was in the middle of examining Mrs. Patterson's persistent cough when Jenny burst through the examination room door, her face pale with alarm. "Marcus, you need to come outside right now. There's a woman who collapsed in the parking lot, and she's not alone." Marcus grabbed his emergency bag and followed Jenny into the frigid morning air. What he saw made his blood freeze in his veins. A young woman, maybe 25, was lying unconscious beside a rusted pickup truck, her lips blue with hypothermia. But it wasn't the woman's condition that stopped Marcus cold. It was the 3 small children huddled around her, all of them crying and shivering in clothes that were far too thin for the Montana winter. The children were clearly siblings, with the same dark hair and delicate features that Marcus saw every day when he looked at Hope, Faith, and Gabriel. They appeared to be around 4 or 5 years old, and they clung to each other with the desperate intensity of children who had learned that the world was not a safe place. Marcus knelt beside the unconscious woman, quickly assessing her condition, while Jenny called for an ambulance. Severe hypothermia, dehydration, and what appeared to be untreated pneumonia. Her pulse was weak and thready, her breathing shallow and labored. She was dying, and without immediate intervention, she wouldn't survive the next hour. "Jenny, get these children inside and warm them up," Marcus ordered, lifting the woman in his arms. "I need to get her stabilized before the ambulance arrives." As Marcus carried the woman into the clinic, one of the children, a little girl with eyes that seemed far too old for her face, grabbed his coat. "Please save our mama," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She said you were the doctor who helps people. She said you would know what to do." Marcus felt something cold and sharp twist in his chest. This woman had driven here specifically to find him, had brought her children through a blizzard to reach his clinic. The question was why, and how did she know who he was? Inside the clinic, Marcus worked with the efficiency born of years in emergency medicine. He started in 4, began warming procedures for hypothermia, and administered antibiotics for what he was certain was a severe respiratory infection. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently in Spanish and English. When the ambulance arrived to transport her to the hospital in Bozeman, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. "I'm riding with her," he told the EMTs. "Jenny, call my neighbors and ask them to watch Hope, Faith, and Gabriel. And keep these 3 children here until I get back. Feed them, get them warm clothes, and don't let them out of your sight." During the helicopter flight to Bozeman, Marcus was able to piece together fragments of the woman's story from her feverish rambling. Her name was Sophia Reyes, and she had been driving for 3 days straight from somewhere in Texas. She kept mentioning someone named Carlos, begging for protection from a man who had hurt her children. Most disturbing of all, she kept saying that she had to find the doctor who saved Rebecca's babies. At the hospital, Marcus stayed with Sophia through the night as the medical team fought to stabilize her condition. It wasn't until dawn that she finally regained consciousness, her dark eyes focusing on Marcus with a mixture of hope and terror. "You're Dr. Sullivan," she said, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube they had just removed. "You're the one who adopted Rebecca's children." Marcus pulled a chair beside her hospital bed. "How do you know about Rebecca?" Sophia's story emerged slowly over the next several hours. She had been Rebecca Martinez's roommate at the shelter in Denver, the person Rebecca had trusted with her deepest fears about Tyler Garrison. When Rebecca disappeared that night, Sophia had been the one to call the police, the one who insisted that something terrible had happened. "Rebecca told me about you," Sophia explained, her hands shaking as she reached for a cup of water. "She said if anything ever happened to her, if Tyler ever found her, she wanted her babies to go to a doctor in Montana who would love them and keep them safe. She made me promise to remember your name." But Sophia's connection to this story went deeper than just friendship with Rebecca. Carlos Mendoza, the man she was running from, was Tyler Garrison's cousin and business partner. When Tyler was arrested for Rebecca's murder, Carlos had taken over their drug operation and had been systematically hunting down anyone who might testify against his family, he found out. "I was the one who called the police about Rebecca," Sophia said, tears streaming down her face. "He said he was going to make me pay for destroying his family. He hurt my children, Dr. Sullivan. He hurt my babies to get back at me." Marcus felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same protective fury he had felt when he first learned about Rebecca's murder. Where are their injuries? What did he do to them? Sophia pulled up her hospital gown to reveal a series of burn marks on her arms and torso, cigarette burns in a deliberate pattern. The same thing he did to them. Maria, Elena, and Diego, they're so scared they barely speak anymore. Carlos said next time he would do worse. The 3 children Sofia had brought with her were not just refugees from domestic violence. They were witnesses to torture, survivors of systematic abuse designed to break their mother's spirit. And Carlos Mendoza was still out there, still looking for them. Marcus called Sheriff Dawson from the hospital and explained the situation. Within hours, Patricia had coordinated with federal authorities to put Carlos Mendoza on the FBI's most wanted list. The children would need to be placed in protective custody, and Sofia would require round-the-clock security until Mendoza was captured. But Marcus had a different idea. "Bring them to my ranch," he told Patricia, "all of them. Sofia and her children can stay with me until this is resolved." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Marcus, you've got 3 toddlers of your own. Adding 4 more people to your household, especially when one of them is being hunted by a violent criminal, doesn't exactly sound like a recipe for safety." "It's the safest place for them," Marcus insisted. "My property is 47 acres of wilderness with only one access road. I've got security, cameras, emergency communications, and I'm trained in emergency medicine. Plus, those kids need stability right now, not another institutional setting." The truth was, Marcus had been deeply affected by his brief interaction with Sofia's children. Maria, the oldest at 6, had the same haunted look he had seen in photographs of child survivors from war zones. Elena, 5, hadn't spoken a word since they arrived at the clinic. 4-year-old Diego clung to his sisters with the desperate intensity of someone who had learned that separation meant danger. These children needed healing, and Marcus believed that the peace and security of his mountain home might provide that. Better than any government safe house. Sheriff Dawson agreed to the arrangement, but with conditions. Marcus's property would be under constant surveillance by federal agents, and he would have direct communication with law enforcement at all times. Sofia and her children would be considered material witnesses in the case against Carlos Mendoza, and their safety was now a federal responsibility. When Marcus returned to Millbrook with Sofia and her children, he found his own 3 toddlers waiting with barely contained excitement. Hope, Faith, and Gabriel had never had other children in their home, and they were fascinated by these new arrivals who spoke a mixture of English and Spanish and seemed to know games they had never seen before. But the integration wasn't without challenges. Sofia's children were deeply traumatized and hypervigilant. They hoarded food at meals, slept fitfully, and startled at every unexpected sound. Maria had taken on the role of protector for her younger siblings, watching Marcus with suspicious eyes and positioning herself between him and Elena and Diego. Whenever possible, Sofia herself was struggling with survivor's guilt and the overwhelming fear that Carlos would somehow find them despite the federal protection. She spent her first week at the ranch barely sleeping, jumping at shadows and constantly checking on her children. It was Hope who broke through the barriers first. The 2-year-old had no understanding of trauma or danger. She simply saw 3 children who looked sad and decided to share her favorite stuffed animal with Elena. The 5-year-old's face lit up with the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her, and she carefully cradled Hope's worn teddy bear as if it were made of precious metal. Gabriel, ever the peacemaker, began teaching Diego simple words in English, while Diego responded by showing Gabriel how to whistle like a bird, a skill that soon had all 6 children chirping and giggling throughout the cabin. Faith, with her characteristic determination, appointed herself Maria's personal tour guide, dragging the older girl around the property and showing her the best hiding spots and climbing trees. But it was the quiet moments that revealed the depth of these children's trauma. Marcus found Maria one night standing guard outside her sibling's bedroom, a kitchen knife clutched in her small fist. When he gently took the weapon away and asked what she was doing, she looked up at him with eyes that belonged to someone 3 times her age. I have to protect them, she said simply. Carlos said he would come back. He said he would hurt Elena and Diego again if I didn't watch them. Marcus knelt down to Maria's eye level, speaking in the same calm voice he used when treating frightened. Patience, Maria, you're safe here. There are police officers watching our house, and I would never let anyone hurt you or your brother and sister. Your job isn't to protect them anymore. That's my job now. The little girl studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she could trust this promise. Finally, she nodded and allowed him to walk her back to bed, though Marcus noticed she left her door open and positioned herself where she could see into the hallway. Over the following weeks, as winter slowly gave way to spring, the two families began to merge in ways that surprised everyone. Sophia proved to be a natural with Marcus's 3 toddlers, speaking to them in both English and Spanish and teaching them songs that made them laugh. Her children gradually relaxed their guard, allowing themselves to play and laugh in ways they apparently hadn't done in months. Marcus found himself learning as much from Sophia and her children as he was teaching them. Maria showed him how to braid hair properly when Faith's wild curls became unmanageable. Elena, once she began speaking again, had an encyclopedic knowledge of birds and could identify every species that visited their property. Diego's skill with his hands rivaled that of craftsmen twice his age. He could carve whistles from twigs and build elaborate structures from nothing but sticks and string. But the real transformation came when Sophia began helping at the clinic. Her fluency in Spanish made her invaluable in treating the growing population of migrant workers in the area, and her natural empathy made her a bridge between Marcus and patients who were struggling with their own traumas. You have a gift for this, Marcus told her one afternoon after she had successfully calmed a young mother whose baby was running a high fever. Have you ever considered medical training? Sophia laughed, but there was something wistful in her expression. I wanted to be a nurse when I was young. Before Carlos, before everything went wrong. But that was a different life. It doesn't have to be, Marcus said gently. There are programs, scholarships for people in your situation. You could start with basic certification and work your way up. The idea seemed to take root in Sophia's mind. Over dinner that night, she began asking Marcus about his own medical training, about the path that had led him from surgical resident to rural family practice. The children listened with fascination as Marcus described operations he had performed, babies he had delivered, lives he had saved. It was Gabriel who made the observation that would change everything. Papa, the 2-year-old said, looking around. The dinner table at the extended family they had become. Why don't they live here forever? The question hung in the air, simple and profound. Marcus looked at Sophia, who was staring down at her plate with an expression he couldn't read. The children, all 6 of them, were watching the adults with the intense focus that comes from having your entire world hanging in the balance. Marcus realized that somewhere over the past few months, he had stopped thinking of Sophia and her children as temporary guests. They had become part of his family, part of his life in ways that felt as natural as breathing. The cabin was fuller, louder, more chaotic than it had ever been, and somehow, it felt more like home than it had since before the accident that took Sarah and Emma. The decision to make their arrangement permanent wasn't discussed immediately. Instead, it grew organically from 1,000 small moments, Sophia helping Hope take her first real steps while Marcus was at the clinic, Maria teaching Faith how to read simple words, Elena and Gabriel collecting wildflowers for centerpieces that made their dinner table look like something from a fairy tale. By late spring, even the federal agents assigned to their protection had begun referring to them as the Sullivan family in their daily reports, but the specter of Carlos Mendoza still loomed over their newfound happiness. Despite a nationwide manhunt, he had managed to evade capture for 6 months, and intelligence suggested he had crossed back into Mexico, where extradition would be complicated. The federal protection detail was scheduled to be reduced at the end of summer, Regardless of whether Carlos was caught, Marcus was reviewing patient files in his home office one evening when Sophia knocked on his door. She had been unusually quiet at dinner, and he could see the tension in her shoulders as she entered the room. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "About what happens when the federal agents leave." Marcus set aside his paperwork and gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. "What's on your mind?" "Agent Hartley pulled me aside today. They're going to start reducing the security detail next month, and by September, we'll be on our own. They think Carlos has probably given up looking for us, but they can't be certain." Marcus had been expecting this conversation for weeks. The FBI couldn't provide indefinite protection for witnesses, especially when the primary suspect had fled the country. "Are you afraid he'll come back?" Sophia was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the children playing in the backyard under the watchful eyes of two federal agents. "Every day," she admitted. "But I'm more afraid of what leaving here would do to my children. They're happy for the first time in years, Marcus. They feel safe. Maria actually sleeps through the night now." "Then don't leave," Marcus said simply. "It's not that easy. I don't have legal status to stay in Montana long term, and I can't keep depending on your charity forever. My children need stability, but they also need a mother who can provide for them." Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. What he was about to propose would change both their lives in ways neither of them had probably imagined when Sophia first collapsed in his parking lot. "What if I told you there was a way to solve both problems at once?" Sophia looked at him with curiosity and wariness in equal measure. "What do you mean, marry me?" The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Sophia's eyes widened, and for a moment, Marcus wondered if he had completely misread the situation. "Marcus, that's—" she began, then stopped, shaking her head. "That's not how marriage is supposed to work. You don't marry someone just to solve their immigration problems." "That's not why I'm asking," Marcus said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I'm asking because over the past 6 months, you and your children have become my family. Not by law or by blood, but by choice. Because when I imagine my future now, I can't picture it without all of you in it." Sophia stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. "You barely know me. You don't know what I was like before all this happened. What kind of person I really am when I'm not running for my life. I know you're brave enough to drive through a blizzard to save your children. I know you're kind enough to sing my babies to sleep when they're having nightmares. I know you're smart enough to learn medical procedures just by watching, and compassionate enough to hold the hand of every scared patient who walks into our clinic." Marcus paused, realizing that what he was saying was absolutely true. "I know you make me want to be a better father, a better doctor, a better man." Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "This is crazy. People don't just decide to get married because it's practical, don't they?" Marcus smiled. "My great-grandparents met on a Wednesday and were married the following Saturday because my great-grandfather needed help running his farm and my great-grandmother needed a place to live. They were married for 62 years and raised 7 children together. Love doesn't always come first, Sophia. Sometimes it grows from respect and partnership and shared purpose. And what would our shared purpose be? Raising 6 children who deserve every chance at happiness we can give them. Building a medical practice that serves people who wouldn't otherwise have access to health care. Creating the kind of family where everyone belongs, even when they come from different places and speak different languages." Sophia was quiet for so long that Marcus began to worry he had pushed too hard too fast. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I need time to think about this. And I need to talk to my children. They've been through enough upheaval. I won't make a decision this big without considering how it affects them." Marcus nodded. "Of course, there's no rush. The offer stands whether Carlos is caught tomorrow or never." But fate had other plans for their carefully considered timeline. 3 days later, Marcus was at the clinic treating a rancher's broken wrist when Jenny burst through the door with a look of panic that made his blood run cold. "Marcus, Agent Hartley just called. They have intelligence that Carlos crossed back into the United States last night. He was spotted at a truck stop about 200 miles south of here, asking questions about a Mexican woman with 3 children. Marcus felt the familiar surge of protective rage that had become his default response to any threat against his family. "Where are Sophia and the kids?" "At the ranch with Agents Morrison and Chun. Hartley's sending additional backup, but it'll be at least 2 hours before they arrive." Marcus was already grabbing his emergency bag and heading for the door. "Call the sheriff's department and tell them we need every available deputy at my property. Then call my neighbors and warn them to lock their doors and stay inside." The drive back to the ranch felt like the longest 20 minutes of Marcus's life. Every worst-case scenario played through his mind, Carlos arriving before the backup, the children being hurt or taken, Sophia sacrificing herself to protect her kids the way Rebecca had done years earlier. When Marcus turned into his driveway, everything appeared normal. The federal agents' black SUVs were parked in their usual positions, and he could see Agent Morrison patrolling the perimeter of the property. But something felt wrong, the kind of wrongness that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Marcus parked behind the house and entered through the kitchen door, expecting to find Sophia and the children in the living room where they usually spent their afternoons. Instead, he found Agent Chun sitting at the kitchen table, a compress held against a bleeding head wound. "Where are they?" Marcus demanded, immediately moving to assess Tien's injury. "Gone," Chun said, wincing as Marcus examined the gash on his forehead. "Sophia got a phone call about an hour ago. Someone claiming to be you, saying there was an emergency at the clinic and she needed to bring the children immediately. Morrison and I knew it was a trap, but before we could stop her, she was loading the kids into her car." Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. Which direction did she go? North, toward the old mining roads. Morrison went after them, but he lost the trail about 10 miles out. "We think Carlos has been watching the property, waiting for his chance." Marcus was already moving toward his truck, his mind racing through possibilities. The old mining roads led to dozens of abandoned sites, perfect places to hide hostages or stage a confrontation away from law enforcement. Carlos would want somewhere isolated, somewhere he could control all the variables. "I'm going after them," Marcus told Chun. "You can't. Backup is 15 minutes out, and this is exactly what Carlos wants, to draw you away from safety so he can get his revenge on everyone who cost him his family." But Marcus was already out the door. He knew these mountains better than any federal agent, knew every hunting trail and forgotten logging road. If Carlos had taken his family into the wilderness, Marcus was the only one who could track them down before it was too late. As he drove deeper into the mountains, following tire tracks on increasingly primitive roads, Marcus's phone rang with a call from an unknown number, Dr. Sullivan. The voice was heavily accented, filled with a cold fury that made Marcus's skin crawl. "I believe you have something. That belongs to me. Where are they, Carlos?" "Safe for now. But that could change very quickly, depending on how cooperative you decide to be." Marcus forced himself to speak calmly, drawing on every negotiation technique he had learned during his psychiatric rotation. "What do you want?" "Justice," Carlos replied. "Your adopted children cost me my cousin. That Mexican whore cost me my freedom. Now you're all going to pay for what you took from me. Leave the children out of this. They haven't done anything to you." Carlos laughed, a sound devoid of any human warmth. "Those brats are the reason Tyler is dead. If Rebecca Martinez had never had children, she never would have been at that shelter. She never would have met Sophia. My cousin would still be alive." Marcus realized he was dealing with someone whose logic had been twisted by grief and drugs into something unrecognizable. Carlos wasn't just seeking revenge, he was trying to undo the past by destroying everyone connected to it. "Tell me where you are, and we can work this out," Marcus said. "Head to the old Copper Creek mine. Come alone, and come unarmed. You have 30 minutes, or I start killing children. And doctor, if I see any federal agents, any police, anyone other than you, Sophia watches me cut her baby's throats before I put a bullet in her head." The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with the sound of his truck's engine and the thundering of his own heartbeat. Copper Creek Mine was another 15 minutes up a barely passable road that most people had forgotten existed. It had been abandoned for over 40 years, leaving behind a network of tunnels and buildings that would give Carlos every advantage in a confrontation. Marcus knew he should call for backup, should wait for the FBI team to coordinate a proper rescue operation. But he also knew that Carlos was serious about his threats, and 30 minutes wasn't enough time for law enforcement to organize and execute a safe assault on the mine. As he drove toward what could very well be his death, Marcus thought about the children he had raised and the woman who had become the center of his world. Hope, Faith, and Gabriel deserved to grow up knowing they were loved and protected. Maria, Elena, and Diego deserved to heal from their trauma and build new lives, free from fear. Sophia deserved a chance to become the person she was meant to be, without the shadow of violence following her every step. If protecting them meant walking into Carlos's trap, then that's exactly what he would do. The Copper Creek mine sat in a natural bowl surrounded by steep hills, accessible only by the winding dirt road Marcus was currently navigating. As he created the final ridge and saw the collection of weathered buildings below, Marcus spotted Sophia's car parked beside the main shaft building. There was no sign of movement, no indication of where Carlos might be holding his hostages. Marcus parked his truck 50 yards from the buildings and approached on foot, his hands visible and empty as Carlos had demanded. The silence was unnerving, though. Birds, no wind, just the echo of his footsteps on the rocky ground. "That's far enough, Doctor." Carlos emerged from behind the main building, and Marcus was shocked by his appearance. The man was gaunt and hollow-eyed, with the telltale signs of long-term methamphetamine use. But his hands were steady as he pointed a pistol at Marcus's chest, and his eyes held the focused intensity of someone who had planned this moment for months. "Where are they?" Marcus asked. Carlos gestured toward the mine shaft building. "Inside. Safe and sound, for now. Let me see them. Let me know they're okay. You're not in a position to make demands, Doctor. But since you're going to die anyway, I suppose it doesn't matter." Carlos whistled, and a moment later, Sophia appeared in the doorway of the building. Even from a distance, Marcus could see that she had been beaten, her lip was split, and she favored her left arm as if it were injured. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, Marcus could make out the shapes of 6 small children. "Now," Carlos said, his voice taking on a conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than screaming would have been, "we're going to have a little talk about consequences." Marcus kept his hands visible as he studied Carlos, looking for any advantage, any weakness he could exploit. The man was clearly unstable, high on something that made his movements erratic and his pupils dilated. But the gun in his hand remained steady, and Marcus knew that desperation could make even the most impaired person deadly accurate. "You destroyed my family," Carlos continued, his voice carrying a sing-song quality that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Tyler was like a brother to me. We grew up together, built our business together. And then that Martinez bitch had to go running to the police. Rebecca was trying to protect her children," Marcus said carefully, keeping his voice calm and non-confrontational. "Just like Sophia is trying to protect hers." Carlos's face twisted with rage. "Those bastard children should have died with their mother, but you had to play hero, didn't you, Doctor? You had to adopt them, give them a nice life, make people think they were worth saving." Marcus realized that Carlos's anger went deeper than just revenge for his cousin's death. This was about a worldview that saw some lives as inherently more valuable than others, that couldn't comprehend why anyone would risk everything to save 3 abandoned babies. "They're innocent children," Marcus said. "They didn't choose any of this." "Innocent?" Carlos laughed, the sound echoing off the mountain walls. "Nothing about the Martinez family is innocent. Rebecca was a whore who seduced my cousin into caring about her bastard babies. Sophia was a snitch who destroyed everything we built. And those children carry the same poison blood." Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. The rational part of his mind knew that engaging with Carlos's twisted logic would only escalate the situation. But hearing this man talk about murdering children as if it were some kind of justice made him want to tear Carlos apart with his bare hands. "What do you want?" Marcus asked again, forcing his voice to remain steady. Carlos smiled, revealing teeth that were rotted from years of drug use. "I want you to choose, Doctor. I want you to experience the same kind of loss that you inflicted on my family." From inside the building, Marcus could hear one of the children crying, a sound that cut through him like a knife. He thought he recognized Gabriel's voice, and the protective rage that had been building in his chest threatened to overwhelm his judgment. "Choose what?" Marcus demanded. "Sophia and her 3 brats or the babies you adopted. You can save one group, but the other dies. Just like Tyler died because of your interference." Marcus felt the world go cold around him. "I'm not choosing between children." "Then they all die," Carlos said with casual indifference. "Starting with the smallest ones. Did you know that little Hope still cries for you when she's scared? Sophia told me all about your happy little family while I was explaining to her what was going to happen." The mention of Hope's name in Carlos's mouth made something snap inside Marcus. Before he could think about the consequences, he was moving, lunging toward Carlos with every ounce of strength and speed he possessed. But Carlos had been expecting this reaction. He sidestepped Marcus's charge and brought the butt of his pistol down on the back of Marcus's skull, sending him crashing to the rocky ground. "Stupid," Carlos said, standing over Marcus as he struggled to remain conscious. "But predictable. Sophia told me you were the kind of man who thinks he can save everyone. Now you're going to learn what happens to heroes in the real world." Marcus rolled onto his side, blood streaming from the gash on his head, and saw Carlos walking toward the mine building where Sophia and the children were trapped. Through the ringing in his ears, he could hear Carlos shouting instructions. "Bring them all outside. Line them up where the good doctor can see them." Sophia emerged first, her hands zip-tied behind her back, her face showing fresh bruises that hadn't been there when Carlos first revealed her. Behind her came the children, all 6 of them holding hands in a chain that broke Marcus's heart. Maria had positioned herself at the front, trying to shield the younger children, even though she was barely 6 years old herself. Hope, Faith, and Gabriel looked confused and terrified, their eyes searching for Marcus even as Carlos herded them into a line. "Now we're going to play a game," Carlos announced, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone describing a birthday party rather than planning multiple murders. "Dr. Sullivan is going to pick which children get to live and which ones get to join their mothers in hell." But as Carlos spoke, Marcus noticed something that gave him the first spark of hope he had felt since arriving at the mine. Sophia was working at her restraints, using a piece of broken glass she'd had somehow managed to conceal to slowly cut through the zip ties. Her movements were subtle, hidden by the way she held her injured arm, but Marcus could see the plastic beginning to fray. More importantly, Marcus recognized the sound he had been hearing in the background: helicopter rotors, still distant but growing closer. Either the federal backup had arrived ahead of schedule, or Sheriff Dawson had called in emergency support. Either way, help was coming. The challenge now was keeping everyone alive until that help arrived. "You want me to choose?" Marcus said. struggling to his feet despite the throbbing in his head. "Fine, I choose myself." Carlos tilted his head like a curious dog. "What? Kill me instead. Leave the children alone, and I'll do whatever you want. You want revenge for your cousin's death? Take it out on me, not on innocent kids who never did anything to hurt you. That's not how this works, Doctor. The whole point is making you suffer the way you made me suffer. Killing you would be too easy." Marcus took a step closer, using his movement to draw Carlos's attention away from Sophia and the children. Tyler's death was his own fault. He was a drug dealer who murdered a young mother. He chose that life, and he paid the price for it. Tyler was family. Carlos screamed, his composure finally cracking. "He was the only family I had left, and you took him away from me." "No," Marcus said firmly, taking another step forward. "Rebecca took him away from you when she chose to protect her children instead of letting him sell them. Danny Bradley took him away from you when he chose to save 3 babies instead of looking the other way. The justice system took him away from you when they chose to hold him accountable for murder." Behind Carlos, Marcus could see that Sophia had succeeded in cutting through her restraints. She was now slowly positioning herself to move, her eyes fixed on Carlos's gun hand. The helicopter sound was getting louder now, close enough that Carlos had to notice it soon. Marcus needed to keep him distracted for just a few more minutes. "You know what the real tragedy is, Carlos?" Marcus continued, his voice taking on the calm, authoritative tone he used when delivering difficult diagnoses. "Tyler could have had a different life. He could have chosen to be a father to those children instead of trying to sell them. He could have chosen to love Rebecca instead of beating her. But he didn't, and that's not my fault or anyone else's." Carlos raised his pistol, pointing it directly at Marcus's face. "Shut up. You don't know anything about my family. I know that whatever Tyler meant to you, it wasn't worth destroying 6 innocent lives. I know that the man you loved wouldn't have wanted you to become a child killer." "You're wrong," Carlos said, but his voice lacked conviction. For just a moment, Marcus could see doubt flickering in his eyes. That moment of hesitation was all Sophia needed. She launched herself at Carlos from behind, grabbing for his gun hand while shouting for the children to run. The pistol discharged into the air as Carlos spun around, trying to shake her off. "Run!" Marcus shouted to the children. "Get behind the buildings and stay down." Maria immediately took charge, grabbing Hope and Gabriel, while Elena scooped up Faith. Diego brought up the rear as all 6 children scrambled for cover behind the abandoned mining equipment. Carlos managed to throw Sophia off, sending her crashing into the side of the building, but the distraction had given Marcus the opening he needed. He tackled Carlos around the waist, driving him to the ground and sending the pistol skittering across the rocky surface. What followed was a desperate struggle for survival. Carlos might have been weakened by years of drug use, but desperation gave him a strength that matched Marcus's determination to protect his family. They rolled across the ground, each fighting for control of the weapon that lay just out of reach. Carlos managed to get his hands around Marcus's throat, pressing his thumbs into his windpipe with the focused intensity of someone who had done this before. Marcus's vision began to gray at the edges, but just as consciousness started to slip away, he heard the sound that saved his life. "Federal agents, drop your weapons and get on the ground." The helicopter had landed behind the ridge, and FBI agents were flooding the mining site. Carlos's grip loosened as he looked up to see a dozen armed agents surrounding them, red laser dots dancing across his chest. "It's over, Carlos," Agent Hartley called out as he approached with his weapon drawn. "Let go of Dr. Sullivan and put your hands where we can see them." For a moment, Marcus thought Carlos might surrender. The man's shoulders sagged as he realized he was outnumbered and outgunned, with nowhere to run in the bowl-shaped valley. But then Carlos's expression hardened with the look of someone who had decided that if he couldn't have his revenge, he could at least take his enemy with him. If I can't have justice, Carlos snarled, his hands tightening around Marcus's throat again, at least I can make sure you don't get your happy ending. The sniper's bullet took Carlos in the center of his forehead, killing him instantly. His body went limp, and Marcus found himself gasping for air as he pushed the dead weight off his chest. The next few minutes were a blur of medical attention, witness statements, and the overwhelming relief of holding his children again. Hope clung to him like she would never let go, while Faith and Gabriel babbled excitedly about the big bird that had brought the police officers. Sophia's children were more subdued, but Marcus could see the tension leaving their bodies as they realized the danger was finally over. Sophia herself had suffered a dislocated shoulder and various bruises, but nothing that wouldn't heal. As the FBI medic worked on her injuries, she caught Marcus's eye and smiled, the first genuinely peaceful expression he had seen from her since the day she collapsed in his parking lot. Is it really over? She asked as they sat together in the back of an ambulance, watching their children play under the watchful eyes of federal agents. It's over, Marcus confirmed. Carlos is dead, and Tyler's still in prison for life. There's no one left to come after you. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, absently rubbing her injured shoulder. So what happens now? The federal protection ends, and we're just free? Marcus took her uninjured hand in his. We're free to make whatever choice we want. We can go back to the way things were, with you and your children as guests in my home. Or you can marry me and make it official. Not because you need protection, not because it's practical, but because we've built something real together. Because our children are already siblings in every way that matters. Because I love you, and I think you might love me too. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy rather than fear. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. 3 months later, on a perfect September morning with the Montana mountains painted gold by the autumn sun, Dr. Marcus Sullivan married Sophia Reyes in a small ceremony at the Millbrook Community Church. The wedding party consisted of 6 children ranging in age from 2 to 6, all of whom had insisted on being part of the ceremony. Hope, Faith, and Gabriel served as ring bearers, walking down the aisle in matching outfits while trying not to drop the simple gold bands that would symbolize their parents' commitment. Maria, Elena, and Diego scattered flower petals with the serious concentration of children who understood the importance of the moment. The guest list included most of the town of Millbrook, who had watched this unlikely family come together and wanted to celebrate their official union. Walt Henderson gave Sophia away, having appointed himself her honorary father for the occasion. Mrs. Chun had made the wedding cake, a 3-layer creation decorated with wildflowers that looked like something from a fairy tale. Detective Ray Martinez had flown in from Colorado to walk his adoptive granddaughter down the aisle, though he spent most of the ceremony trying not to cry as he watched Hope, Faith, and Gabriel participate in their father's wedding. Agent Hartley and several members of his team attended as well, having developed genuine affection for the family they had protected for so many months. But it was the moment after the ceremony, when Marcus looked out at his assembled family, his wife, his 6 children, his friends who had become extended family, that he truly understood how much his life had changed. 3 years earlier, he had been a broken man fleeing to the mountains to escape his grief. Now he was surrounded by love in ways he had never imagined possible. Sophia had enrolled in a nursing program at the university in Bozeman, driving 3 days a week to attend classes while Marcus and Jenny managed the clinic. Her natural empathy and intelligence made her a gifted student, and she was already talking about specializing in pediatric care. The children were thriving in ways that amazed everyone who knew their story. Maria had lost the haunted look that had defined her for so long, and was excelling in 1st grade while serving as the unofficial leader of her 5 younger siblings. Elena had discovered a love of music and could play simple songs on the piano Marcus had bought for the cabin. Diego's skill with his hands had evolved into a passion for building and engineering that suggested a bright future in construction or architecture. Hope, Faith, and Gabriel were growing into distinct personalities while maintaining the special bond they had shared since birth. They were bilingual now, switching effortlessly between English and Spanish as they played with their older siblings. Most importantly, they were happy and secure, surrounded by adults who would move mountains to protect them. The clinic had expanded again, now serving as a regional medical center with satellite offices in 5 towns. Marcus had brought in 2 additional doctors and was planning to open a small emergency room to handle trauma cases that would otherwise require long drives to Billings or Bozeman. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the program. Sophia had suggested a support network for women fleeing domestic violence, providing temporary housing, medical care, and legal assistance for families in crisis. They had already helped dozens of women and children find safety and new beginnings, turning their own experience into a lifeline for others. On their first anniversary, as Marcus and Sophia sat on their front porch watching their 6 children play in the yard while the sun set behind the mountains, Sophia asked the question that had been on both their minds. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't driven here that day? If I had gone somewhere else, or if you hadn't been the kind of person who takes in strays?" Marcus pulled her closer, breathing the scent of her shampoo mixed with the pine-scented mountain air. "I think we would have found each other eventually. Maybe not the same way, but somehow, some things are just meant to be. Even with all the chaos, 6 kids, 2 careers, a house that's never quiet." Marcus laughed, listening to the sounds of their children's laughter, mixing with the evening calls of birds settling in for the night. "Especially with all the chaos. Sarah used to say that the best families aren't the ones that have it easy. They're the ones that choose to love each other through the difficult times." As if summoned by the mention of love, Hope came running across the yard with a bouquet of dandelions she had picked for her stepmother. Faith and Gabriel were close behind, followed by Maria, Elena, and Diego, all of them chattering excitedly about something they had discovered in their play. "Papa, Mama," Hope called out, using the names she had chosen for her parents without any prompting from adults. "Look what we found." Marcus and Sophia smiled at each other as their children swarmed onto the porch, each eager to share their discoveries and adventures. This was their family born from tragedy, forged by choice, and strengthened by the kind of love that doesn't ask where you came from but promises to walk beside you wherever you're going. In the distance, a loon called across the lake that bordered their property, its haunting song carrying across the water like a blessing. Marcus had once thought that peace was something you found in silence and solitude. Now he knew better. Peace was 6 children arguing over who got to help with dinner. Peace was a wife who fell asleep reading medical textbooks while planning how to help other families find safety. Peace was a house full of noise and laughter and the occasional chaos that commies with loving people unconditionally. As the stars began to appear over the Montana mountains, Marcus Sullivan counted his blessings and realized that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as emergencies, wrapped in crisis, and delivered by people who need saving as much as you do. He had set out to heal others, but in the end, they had been the ones to heal him, and they all lived not happily ever after, because real life doesn't work that way, but fully, completely, and surrounded by the kind of love that makes even the hardest days worth living. 7 years had passed since Marcus and Sophia's wedding, and the Sullivan family had become a cornerstone of the Millbrook community. The children were growing into remarkable young people, each carrying the strength that comes from surviving early trauma, while being raised in an environment of unconditional love. Maria, now 13, had developed into a natural leader with an unwavering sense of justice. She served as student body president at Millbrook Middle School and had started a peer mediation program that helped younger students resolve conflicts peacefully. Her early experiences protecting her siblings had evolved into a passion for advocacy that teachers predicted would take her far in whatever field she chose. Elena, 12, had discovered she possessed an extraordinary gift for languages. In addition to her native Spanish and English, she was teaching herself French and Mandarin through online courses. She dreamed of becoming a translator for international humanitarian organizations. Inspired by her own family's journey from crisis to stability, Diego, 11, had inherited his mother's mechanical aptitude and his adoptive father's methodical thinking. He could repair anything with an engine and had already designed improvements to several pieces of equipment at Marcus's expanded medical clinic. The boy who had once carved whistles from twigs now built complex robots for his school's engineering competitions. Hope, Faith, and Gabriel, now 9 years old, had grown into confident children who switched effortlessly between English and Spanish, often finishing each other's sentences in whichever language felt more appropriate for the moment. Hope had developed Sophia's nurturing instincts and could often be found caring for injured animals she discovered around their property. Faith possessed Marcus's analytical mind and devoured medical textbooks with the same enthusiasm other children showed for comic books. Gabriel had inherited his biological mother, Rebecca's artistic spirit, creating paintings and sculptures that captured the beauty of their mountain home with startling maturity. The Sullivan Medical Center had become one of the most respected rural healthcare facilities in the state. Marcus had assembled a team of 8 medical professionals, including Sophia, who had graduated nursing school with honors and specialized in trauma care. Their domestic violence support program had helped over 200 families find safety and new beginnings, with many former clients staying in touch to share their success stories. But it was on a cold February morning, almost exactly 8 years after Sophia first collapsed in Marcus's parking lot, that the family would face a test that would challenge everything they had built together. The relief on Gabriel's face was immediate and profound. "Promise?" "I promise," Marcus said solemnly. "All of you are stuck with us forever." Maria, who had been listening to the conversation with growing concern, raised her hand like she was in school. "Is the bad man Tyler going to try to hurt them again?" "No," Sophia assured her. "Tyler is very sick and will never be able to hurt anyone again. But his mother came to ask us something, and we wanted to get everyone's opinion before we decide what to do." Marcus explained about the inheritance offer, carefully avoiding the details about Tyler's request to meet the children. He watched as his 6 children processed the information, each responding in character. Elena immediately wanted to know if accepting the money would somehow make them obligated to Tyler or his family. Diego asked practical questions about how the money would be managed and whether it would affect their family's finances. Maria worried that taking money from the bad man would somehow taint their family's reputation in the community. But it was Hope who asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. "Would our first mama want us to take his money?" Marcus and Sophia looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. Rebecca Martinez had been a young woman who had sacrificed everything to ensure her children had a chance at a better life. Would she want them to benefit from the wealth of the man who had killed her? "I think," Sophia said carefully, "that your first mama would want you to have every opportunity to succeed in life. I think she would want you to go to college, to pursue your dreams, to never have to worry about money the way she did. But she might not want us to take it from him specifically," Faith added, demonstrating the ethical complexity that made her such a remarkable child. Marcus realized that his 9-year-old daughter had identified the central moral dilemma that had been troubling him since Patricia Garrison's visit. How do you separate the source of a gift from its potential benefits? "What if we took the money but used it to help other people too?" Gabriel suggested. "Like the families that Mama helps at the clinic." Sophia smiled at her youngest son, amazed. once again by the compassion these children had developed despite their traumatic beginnings. "That's a very generous idea, Gabriel. We could start a scholarship program," Elena added, warming to the theme. "For kids whose families can't afford college. Or fund the domestic violence shelter," Maria suggested. "So more families like ours can find help when they need it." Diego, ever practical, was already working out the logistics. "If we split it, 6 ways for our educations, that's still enough left over to do a lot of good for other people." Marcus looked around at his children, all 6 of them, and felt his heart swell with pride. They had taken a complex moral dilemma and found a solution that honored both their practical needs and their ethical values. "So you think we should accept the inheritance?" Marcus asked. "I think we should accept it for the right reasons," Hope said, speaking with the wisdom of someone far older than 9. "Not because we forgive Tyler for what he did, but because we can use his money to help people the way our family was helped." 2 weeks later, Marcus met with Patricia Garrison and Tyler's attorney to finalize the inheritance arrangements. Tyler had agreed to the children's proposal to split the money between educational trusts and charitable donations, with the understanding that he would never have any contact with Hope, Faith, and Gabriel. The legal paperwork was complex, but the outcome was straightforward. Each of the 6 Sullivan children would have their college educations fully funded, and the remaining money would establish the Rebecca Martinez Foundation, providing scholarships and support services for families affected by domestic violence. Tyler Garrison died 3 weeks later, alone in his prison hospital bed. Marcus felt no satisfaction in his death, only a profound sadness for the waste of a human life and the ripple effects of violence that had touched so many people. But from that waste, something beautiful was growing. The Rebecca Martinez Foundation's first recipients were a young mother fleeing an abusive marriage and her 2 children, who were relocated to a safe community and provided with job training, childcare, and educational support. At the foundation's inaugural dinner, Marcus stood before a room full of donors, social workers, and families who had benefited from their programs. Hope, Faith, and Gabriel sat at the head table, wearing formal clothes and beaming with pride as their father spoke about their mother's legacy. "Rebecca Martinez was barely 23 when she died," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded ballroom. "She never got to see her children take their first steps, speak their first words, or accomplish any of the remarkable things they've already achieved. But her sacrifice, her determination to protect her babies, even at the cost of her own life, continues to ripple outward, touching families she never met and children she never had the chance to hold." He looked at his 3 youngest children, remembering the tiny infants he had first seen in the NICU, and marveled at the confident, compassionate young people they had become. Tonight, we honor Rebecca's memory not with sadness, but with action. Every family we help, every child we send to college, every woman who finds the courage to leave an abusive relationship because she knows support is available, all of this is Rebecca's legacy, carried forward by children who embody her strength and her love. As applause filled the room, Marcus caught Sophia's eye and saw his own emotions reflected in her face. They had built something extraordinary from the ashes of tragedy, not just their own family, but a network of support that would continue helping others long after they were gone. The children who had once been left to freeze in a metaphorical shack had grown into advocates for those still searching for warmth and safety. And in helping others find their way home, they had discovered the true meaning of the promise Marcus had made all those years ago: stay forever. Forever wasn't just about duration, it was about the depth of commitment, the willingness to extend your family to include anyone who needed belonging, and the understanding that some bonds transcend biology, geography, and even death itself. 15 years had passed since that frozen February morning when Marcus first said those life-changing words. The Sullivan family now stood as a testament to the transformative power of unconditional love and unwavering commitment. Hope Sullivan Martinez, now 24 and fresh from graduating medical school at Johns Hopkins, had returned to Montana to begin her residency in emergency medicine at the expanded Sullivan Medical Center. Her specialty choice surprised no one. She had inherited both her adoptive father's healing instincts and her biological mother's fierce determination to protect others. Faith had pursued her analytical nature into biomedical research, earning her PhD from Stanford at just 23. She was already making groundbreaking discoveries in genetic therapy, driven by a desire to prevent other children from experiencing the kind of early trauma that had shaped her own life. Gabriel had combined his artistic talents with his passion for social justice, becoming a documentary filmmaker whose work exposed systemic inequalities and gave voice to the voiceless. His latest film, about families separated by immigration policies, had won awards at 3 major film festivals. Maria, now 28, had fulfilled her childhood promise to become an advocate, graduating from Harvard Law School and establishing her own practice specializing in family law and domestic violence cases. She had personally helped over 100 families navigate the legal system to find safety and justice. Elena's gift for languages had taken her around the world as a humanitarian coordinator for the United Nations. At 27, she had overseen refugee programs in 6 countries and spoke 9 languages fluently. Her work reuniting displaced families had earned her international recognition. Diego, 26, had built a construction company that specialized in creating safe houses and transitional housing for domestic violence survivors. His innovative designs prioritized both security and psychological comfort, helping families feel protected while they rebuilt their lives. The Rebecca Martinez Foundation had grown beyond Marcus and Sophia's wildest dreams, with an endowment now exceeding $10 million and programs operating in 12 states. They had helped over 3,000 families escape dangerous situations and provided educational scholarships to more than 500 children. But it was on this particular autumn day, as Marcus prepared to deliver the keynote speech at the Foundation's 50th anniversary gala, that the true magnitude of their impact would become clear. The event was being held in Denver, the same city where Rebecca had once sought refuge. In a shelter where Sophia had fled in terror, where so many of their success stories had begun their journeys toward healing. The ballroom was packed with donors, politicians, social workers, and families whose lives had been transformed by the Foundation's work. Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that included his 6 children, his beloved wife Sophia, Detective Ray Martinez, now retired, but still an active board member, Sheriff Patricia Dawson, and dozens of people who had become family over the years. 15 years ago, Marcus began, I thought I understood what family meant. I believed it was about blood relations, shared genetics, and traditional structures. I was wrong about almost everything. He paused, his eyes finding Sophia in the crowd. She was now the Foundation's executive director, having earned her master's degree in social work while raising 6 children and helping to run a medical practice. Her strength and resilience continued to amaze him daily. Family, I've learned, is about choice. It's about looking at someone who needs a home and saying, stay forever. It's about children who were born to one mother but raised by another, growing up to carry forward the best qualities of both. It's about taking the worst moments of your life and transforming them into hope for others. In the audience, Marcus could see some of the Foundation's recent success stories. Carmen Rodriguez, who had fled an abusive marriage with her 3 children and was now a nurse practitioner. The Johnson family, whose teenager had received a Foundation scholarship and was studying to become a social worker. Michael Chen, whose documentary about domestic violence had been funded by one of Gabriel's film grants. But tonight isn't really about the Foundation, Marcus continued. It's about a young woman named Rebecca Martinez who made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure her children had a chance at life. It's about the ripple effects of love and courage that continue to spread outward, touching lives that Rebecca never could have imagined. He gestured toward Hope, Faith, and Gabriel, who were sitting together in the front row. These three remarkable individuals are living proof that trauma doesn't have to define you. That with enough love, support, and opportunity, children can overcome anything and grow up to change the world. Hope stood up, surprising everyone, including Marcus. "Papa, can I say something?" Marcus smiled and gestured for her to join him at the podium. As Hope walked forward, Faith and Gabriel followed, and then Maria, Elena, and Diego rose as well. Soon all 6 Sullivan children were standing together on the stage where their father had been speaking. Hope took the microphone, her voice clear and strong. "We are who we are today because 15 years ago, our father looked at a broken situation and saw possibility instead of problems. Because our mother chose to build a life with a man who already had 3 children and loved us as if we had always been hers." Gabriel stepped forward to continue. "We're here because our biological mother, Rebecca Martinez, chose our lives over her own. Because strangers like Danny Bradley risked everything to keep us safe. Because a grandfather we barely knew chose to love us anyway." Faith added her voice to the tribute. "Because federal agents, nurses, teachers, neighbors, and countless other people chose to invest in our futures when they had no obligation to do so." Maria took the microphone next. "Because when our own mother was running for her life with 3 terrified children, she found people who said, 'You belong here now.'" Elena continued the theme. "Because community isn't about where you're born, it's about where you're welcomed and where you choose to build something beautiful." Finally, Diego concluded their impromptu speech. "Because family isn't about genetics. It's about who shows up when you need them most and who commits to showing up for the rest of your life." The 6 Sullivan children stood together, hands linked, as the audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at the incredible human beings these children had become. Sophia joined them on stage, and Marcus wrapped his arms around his entire family, the family that had been built from crisis, strengthened by choice, and bound together by unshakable love. Later that evening, as the family gathered in Marcus and Sophia's hotel suite, Detective Martinez shared a letter that had arrived at the Foundation's office that morning. It was from a young woman in Texas who had escaped an abusive relationship with her newborn twins, thanks to a Foundation program. "Dr. and Mrs. Sullivan," the letter read, "I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted you to know that your Foundation saved my life and the lives of my children. When I had nowhere else to turn, you gave me hope. When I thought my babies would grow up surrounded by violence, you showed me there was another way. I'm now safe, employed, and raising my children in a loving environment. They will grow up knowing that strangers can become family, that love is stronger than fear, and that there's always hope for a better tomorrow. Thank you for proving that miracles happen when people choose to care about each other." Marcus read the letter aloud, his voice breaking slightly on the final sentences. This was why they did the work, not for recognition or awards, but for moments like these, when they could help other families find their way from darkness into light. As the evening wound down, and the children began saying their goodbyes, Hope lingered behind with her parents. "Papa, Mama," she said, using the childhood names that had never felt inappropriate, even as she'd grown into an accomplished adult. "I have something to tell you." Marcus and Sophia exchanged a glance, wondering what their eldest daughter might be about to reveal. Hope smiled, her eyes bright with excitement. "I'm pregnant. David and I are having a baby." The announcement sent the room into joyful chaos as the entire family surrounded Hope with hugs and congratulations. Marcus felt a profound sense of completion as he held his daughter. The tiny infant he had once fed with bottles in a Montana cabin was now preparing to become a mother herself. "Have you thought about names?" Sophia asked through happy tears. Hope nodded. looking directly at Marcus. If it's a girl, we're thinking about Rebecca. And if it's a boy. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. We'd like to name him Marcus. As Marcus held his daughter and contemplated the arrival of his first grandchild, he reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them all to this moment. From that first desperate phone call about a body in the river, to 3 abandoned babies in a truck stop, to a terrified woman collapsing in his parking lot. To this moment of pure joy, every step had led them here. The little girl who had once been left to freeze in metaphorical circumstances was now creating a new life, surrounded by love and support that would ensure her child never experienced the kind of fear and abandonment that had marked her earliest days. Marcus looked around at his extraordinary family, his wife who had taught him that healing comes in many forms, his children who had shown him that resilience could overcome any obstacle, and the broader community of people who had become part of their extended family through shared purpose and mutual care. He thought about Rebecca Martinez, whose courage had made all of this possible. He thought about his late wife Sarah and daughter Emma, whose memory had taught him to cherish every moment with the people you love. He thought about all the families who had found safety and hope through their foundation, and all the children who would grow up free from violence because someone had chosen to care. 15 years ago, Marcus had said, "Stay forever," to 3 abandoned babies. Tonight, surrounded by the family they had all built together, he understood that forever wasn't just a promise, it was a choice they made every single day. And as he watched his children planning their futures, supporting each other, and preparing to create families of their own, Marcus knew that the ripple effects of love and commitment would continue long after he was gone. The children who had once needed saving had grown into adults who would spend their lives saving others. That, perhaps, was the true meaning of forever, not just the duration of love, but its endless capacity to multiply and transform everything it touches. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.